Today we will be reading through chapters 10 and 11 of Journey. Chapter 10. In the box of pictures, now ruined, were Bloom and her kittens, 4 tiny bodies, all wet and dark. "I've only been gone an hour," I whispered. Grandma smiled. "That's all it takes sometimes." "Sorry about the pictures, Journey," said Grandfather. I sighed. "It's all right. It was impossible, but it was that baby's hand." My voice trailed off. We watched the kittens fumbling to nurse and listened to their soft mewings. Bloom stared up at Grandma. "Yes," Grandma said, as if answering a question the rest of us hadn't heard. "You are a wonderful mother." Cat reached down and rubbed Bloom's chin. "Who taught her?" I asked suddenly. "Taught her what?" said Cooper. "How to have kittens?" "No," I said. "How to be a mother." There was silence. Grandfather lifted his shoulders. "Mothers know," he said, looking at Grandma. Cat said what I was thinking. "Not all of them." No one spoke. But as if Bloom had understood our words, she began to clean our babies, showing us how to be a mother. "Grandpa," I said, "I want to take a picture, with the timer." My grandmother and Cat groaned at the same time. "Oh no," complained Cat. "Don't tell me. 2 of them?" Grandfather grinned at me. "Of course he wants to take a family picture. Out in the hall, Journey." In the hallway, Grandfather's camera and his tripod leaned against the wall. "I'll take the picture. I'm not family," Cooper called to me. I stood in the doorway and looked at Cooper through the viewfinder. His cowboy hat still sat on the top of his head. "Cooper," I said, "you're part of the family. But I want to take this picture." When I moved the camera, I saw Grandfather smiling at me from across the room. "Now," I said, "everyone—" There was laughter. "What?" I asked. "You sound like a you-know-who," said Cat, bending her head toward Grandfather. "Who?" asked Grandfather. "The photographer twins," said Cooper wearily. "Now," I said, "everybody—" I shot a look at Cat. Grandma sat, Cat next to her, leaning back against her shoulder. Cooper knelt behind them, Grandfather on the other side, watching me closely. "Ready?" I said. Time slows somehow as I look through the camera. I watch Bloom look at her babies. I watch Grandma kiss the top of Cat's head, and Cat turn to smile up at her. I see Cooper with his dumb hat and my grandfather smiling at me because he knows I am looking at him. "Smile," I say to them, but I don't need to say it, because they are all smiling. Real smiles, with their eyes too. 10, 9, 8, I say, and Cooper's hat tilts and Cat snorts with laughter. 7, 6, I run to get into the picture, and Grandfather reaches out a hand toward me. I tumble into his arms, across his lap, and he holds me there, looking a little surprised, as if I'm a newborn baby. I stare at the button on his shirt. Then I stare up at his face. "Quick," he whispers to me, and I turn and look into the camera just as the shutter clicks and Cooper's hat falls down. The kitchen was dark and cool and quiet. Cooper had stayed for dinner, chicken and mashed potatoes and peas. "It's good to eat with people who don't have food on their faces," said Cooper seriously. He paused. "But I love Emmett." "You do," agreed Grandma. Grandfather, his chin leaning on his hand, looked at Cooper. "You're a good brother," he said. Under the table, I felt a sudden brush against my legs. Bloom looked up at me. Then she walked to the screen door. "Where's she going?" I asked, alarmed. Cat got up from the dinner table. "She's going out, Journey. Don't fret." She opened the door, and Bloom went out to sit on the porch. Cat turned to look at me. "She'll come back," she said softly. Cooper got up too. "Thank you," he said. I like to get home for Emmett's bath." He went out to the porch and stood for a moment next to Bloom. Then he put on his hat. "Bye, Cooper," said Cat. We went out, all of us, and waved to Cooper. "Maybe someday," said Cat thoughtfully, "I will marry him." Grandma, smiling, tapped Cat on her shoulder. The 2 of them went to their garden. Grandfather stood next to me, fiddling with his camera. I looked up at him, trying hard to remember something new, something at the edge of my mind. He put the camera around his neck. "Think I'll take a small walk to the hen house." I smiled and watched him walk down the steps. Inside, the phone rang, and he turned. "I'll get it," I called to him. "Hello?" I look out the screen door. "Journey, is that you?" says my mother. There is crackling on the line, and I stand very still, watching my grandfather walk away from the house. Journey? Her voice is stronger now. So, how have you been? I take a breath. A cat has come, I say, and the cat is a very good mother. My voice rises, and she is staying here with me. Forever. Chapter 11. Grandfather found me in the barn. Light slanted through the windows, and dust motes floated in the air between us. He sat next to me on the bench in front of the wall of pictures. There were dozens now that spread across the back wall. Some I'd never seen. That's a new one, I said, pointing to a close-up of a fierce-looking chicken. That chicken pecked me on the wrist, said Grandfather. He held out his hand to show me the small red puncture wound. Taking pictures is dangerous business. I nodded, looking at the picture I had taken, all soft and blurred, my grandfather holding Emmett on his knees. There was silence. She asked me how I was, I said after a moment. I looked up at Grandfather, and she never said she was sorry for leaving. Grandfather sighed. No, Liddy doesn't want to feel guilty. Well, she is guilty, I said so softly that Grandfather bent his head down next to me to hear, and then she said, They were only pictures, Journey. Grandfather reached over and put his arm around me. I leaned against him. A picture stops a little piece of time, good or bad, and saves it, he said. Your mama never thought there was anything worth looking back on after your papa left. She thought all good things were ahead of her, waiting to happen, just around the corner. Your mama doesn't really understand about the pictures. But we understand, don't we? I said. Grandfather's arm tightened around me. We do. I sighed. I sure would like things to look back on. It was quiet in the barn. Somewhere in the garden, Grandma was playing the flute, the beginnings of a song I didn't know. Grandma's getting better, I said. Yes, said Grandfather, and it's a good thing, too, he added, making me smile. Mama wants me to visit her, I said. Grandfather got up and went to the wall of pictures and bent down as if he were examining them. I told her I couldn't. I told her I have a cat and kittens to take care of. Grandfather straightened. I told her someday, maybe. If she sent me words instead of money, I might visit. Maybe. Grandfather said nothing. Grandfather? What, Journey? His voice was soft. I told her that nothing is perfect. Sometimes things are good enough. I got up and stood next to him and looked at the family picture of all of us, our necks all white in the sun as we looked up at the airplane overhead. I like that picture, I said. So do I. You said it would be a good picture. Remember? I looked at the picture of us all framed in the barn doorway, with a blur of chicken flying past. Is that the chicken that pecked you? I asked. Grandfather began to laugh. Might be. He threw back his head, and I stared at him, surprised at that sound. It had been a long time since I'd heard him laugh, and suddenly I thought of Mr. McDougall's kiss on my forehead, how strange it had felt. I watched Grandfather, and then, before he stopped laughing, because I wanted to remember what it was like, I stood on tiptoe and kissed him.